Hey, welcome to Hear God's Word. This is Michael Loinger. In this podcast, we study and dissect the Bible to better understand what it means and is trying to say. We'll cover theology and dig into the original meaning through language and word studies. We'll even discuss scientific and historical ties, but we'll always come back to the basics. There's so many layers to the Bible, and it's all important. So, if you want to hear what God has to say, then let's dive in. All right, welcome back to the Bible podcast, and we're in the middle of beginning the story of Sodom and Gomorrah, and we just at the beginning of chapter 19 in Genesis had two angels show up, and we saw there was a lot of similarities with what happened right before. With it seems like they're two of the men who had previously just visited Abraham. And so now we find out that two of these men are angels, and you could say messengers. So are they humans? Are they spiritual? Are they spiritual beings just putting on flesh in disguise? I don't have an answer for that, but it's clear that they have some level of both. They're either men who are very spiritual, or they were actually spiritual beings that did put on and disguise themselves in flesh, because they physically actually interact in the story that we're about to talk about next. So it's clear that they're not just aberrations and appearing as, figments of the eye, because they're dialoguing with Lot, and we'll also see that they physically have an interaction. So let's pick up reading the story actually from the end of verse 4. It talks about how before they could lay down to sleep, all the men, both young and old, from every part of the city of Sodom surrounded the house. So now on to verse 5. They shouted to Lot, "Where are the men who came to you last night? Bring them out so we can know them." So I want to pause there, and we'll go little bit by little bit. But after Lot welcomes these angels in, here in the story, it says that all of the guys in the town showed up at his doorstep. And let me just be completely explicit here with what is going on. They don't want to get to know them personally and in a kind way. When it says bring them out so we can know them, it's basically so we can have sex with them, essentially, so that they can rape them. And so not only is this just disgusting and sick in the first place, like, number one, they're guests to the town, and they're being exploited by the people of this town. That shows already how upfront. We haven't gotten to know too much about Sodom, but one of the very little things we know already now is that literally late at night, the whole town, all of the men of this city, like both like young people with perverted minds and old pervs, end up going to the house so that they can have homosexual rape with these visitors. Like, if it wasn't bad enough that like it's wrong to show up at someone's house and ask if you can essentially have sex with their guest, the fact that these guys, as we're going to continue reading, are violent about it, the fact that it's not even in a consensual way, it's not them committing to a relationship with these men. On top of it, it's also unnatural because these are a bunch of men wanting to have sex with other men. And so on top of the homosexual nature, it also is it's not even I don't want to talk about all this kind of stuff, but it's not even just a twosome. It's literally an entire town orgy. And like, this is completely out of bounds and disgusting. Like, how could a city even be that horrible? And so we're already seeing why Abraham was like, hey, God, if there's 50 righteous people, if there's even 10 there, would you save them? And God is like, yeah, but I think it's going to show that, like, if every man besides just Lot and his guests are okay in this town, if they're the only men, then that's not a good sign, because on top of it, you know, obviously men made up the courts and they made a lot of the important legal decisions. And so if there's not even one good witness in this city because all of them are at Lot's door to do something evil, like, we're going to see him actually call them out on this. But we're also going to read something else pretty sad and discouraging. And before you go judging Lot, let's read and at least try and see things from his perspective. So, continuing on into verse 6, it says, Lot went outside to them, shutting the door behind him. He said, "No, my brothers, don't act so wickedly." And so here we can see a few things, but I wanted to go back to verse 5 real quick. And that's the fact that it's very clear that these two angels are actually men, like human men. Because literally, if the people of the town are wanting to have sex with them, you don't have sex with a ghost. I mean, I'm sure there's really messed up in the brain people who have tried and maybe succeeded. But we also, I guess, you know, have the story of the sons of God who mated with the daughters of men, and who knows exactly what that is fully referring to. So there's some weird stuff going on here, but like the fact that they want to have sex with visitors in the town, yeah, it's just disturbing. And the fact that they don't even realize, but these two men aren't just any ordinary people, but they're messengers from God. And the people of the town want to rape them. Because I'm sure that the two angels aren't like, oh, yeah, we'd love to, you know, have sex with everyone here. Oh, let's have a town orgy. Like, absolutely not. Like, this, like, completely disgusting thinking. And of course, you know, the people of Sodom, they are caught up in their way of thinking about life. Basically, our pleasures, our desires come first. They got a thought in their head and they operated probably in a very violent and sexual culture where you literally do anything that pleases you. And this is true a lot of ancient times, and even into sometimes people still have this messed up sort of thinking in war, even until recent history, and sometimes in very disgusting modern settings. There's military people who, after conquering victims, will end up raping them. And so essentially, the town sees these guys as their visitors, and they have the right to do whatever they want because, they also obviously have the upper hand here. When it says the whole town, it probably wasn't literally every man in the town, but you get the point. Maybe it was. So then moving on, we get into verse 6, and he goes out to meet them. He shuts the door behind him. So he obviously leaves the guests indoor. He wasn't 100% on board, obviously. And so he wanted to talk with them. And the interesting thing is, he actually calls them brothers. And so, this isn't unheard of and uncommon. A lot of times, especially in ancient times, and especially when Hebrews are writing, a lot of times you would call someone a brother, but it does show that you're part of that group, that you consider them friends and even almost like family, even if they're not immediate family. And it's very clear he obviously feels like this is his home, since these are his brothers who are at his door. He's probably spent time with some of the ones that he saw out there, especially if he's working at the city gate. And so this is a discouraging moment for him. And he says, like, no, guys, like, no, brothers, don't act so wickedly. And wicked is the word for evil or even troublesome. And so he's telling them, guys, don't do this really troubling action that you guys are asking for. Like, you guys are my brothers. You're better than this. Don't come over here asking for this. Like, this is going too far. Can't you guys see that? And so he has some love for the people of his city. He spent the last many years there, but then he says something almost unthinkable next. He says in verse 8, look, I have 2 daughters who've never been intimate with a man. Let me bring them out to you, and you can do whatever you please. Only don't do anything to these men, for they've come under the protection of my roof. And so here, it's the exact opposite, I think, of what we would do in our culture. Does he want to give up his daughters to these guys to be able to do whatever they want that will please them? Like, first off, even before we get to what's next, it's extremely difficult talking about this topic. And why would he even consider giving his 2 daughters, who are essentially virgins? That must mean they're pretty young still. So he's giving his young, unmarried, and when it says they hadn't been intimate, it uses the same word, that they hadn't known any men. So they hadn't had sex with any guys before. And Lot was willing to basically sell his 2 daughters out so these guys could go at them and have a field day and essentially rape and give them the worst possible first experience they could ever have, like getting gang raped by the entire city of men, like allowing your daughters to have that as the first experience they ever have of sex. This is like almost unthinkable. And he says, you know what? Like, I don't think he wanted to say that, but I think it was probably out of desperation that he said that. Like, guys, no, please don't hurt these guests. They're under my roof. They're under my protection, and I need to take care of these guys. They're important visitors, and you know the customs. You treat guests well, and I'm going to protect these guys at all costs. Please don't do anything. Don't make me. If you need to, here's my 2 daughters. I don't want to do this, but if you guys will leave them alone, you guys can do whatever you want with them. Just make sure they survive after, and just please don't harm my guests. And remind you, these are angels and messengers that he is aware that God sent to him. And maybe he's not even fully aware of that yet. He is calling them lords. So obviously, it's a culture of respecting your guests, as we were talking about before. And they were already going to stay in the town square, if you remember. And so they would have had absolutely no protection if it wasn't for Lot here, keeping them behind closed doors. And notice he closed the door behind while they were in there, and he went out to meet them. So he made sure that they were staying safe inside. And so what are the men going to do next? Are they going to be like, oh, okay, yeah, bring your daughters out. We'd have a field day with them. You know, it's second best thing we could get. We came all the way out here tonight, so we might as well get our fun and pleasure in. And I also want to say one more thing about pleasure and what's going on here. Essentially, when someone is so hyper focused on desires and pleasure, this is what lust is. And if you remember in the Garden of Eden, it says that essentially the woman was envying or lusting for the fruit. Like she wanted it so bad that she got hyper focused on it, and it became her one zone focused desire. Like, no way. Like I can't unhear and unthink these things now. Like, now that I know I can become greater, now that I know I can become like a god, like I can't. The fruit looks good, and honestly, what it will do for me has me so intrigued, and I can't stop thinking about this now. And when we get so focused on things that it feels like we can't resist it anymore, sadly, we end up giving in. And these men were so hyper focused. They went in knowing what they felt and wanted. And sometimes when you don't get that thing, it just makes you even more aggravated and want it even more. And you start to become really disgusting in the way that you treat the people around you when someone is trying to get sex from someone, but that person doesn't want it. Sometimes people go to extremely horrible and violent and far out lengths that they never thought they would go to. It becomes the I need it sort of mentality when we get focused into lust. And that's obviously what the men of the city were doing. They were just like Adam and Eve. It says that she lusted after the fruit on the tree and she took it. She had gotten so focused in on what she wanted to get out of that fruit that she wasn't even thinking about what God had told her, that she's going to die. And so many times we don't think about the consequences afterwards, what it's going to do to ourselves or to other people. And here, the men of the city, they didn't think at all about, oh, would the guests want to participate in this gang rape session, or would they consent mutually to us all having a citywide men's sex orgy party? Obviously these are some angels from God, and so I think the obvious answer is no, they wouldn't. But obviously the men knew that the visitors were not going to say yes. So they were so belligerent, they were so lustful that they felt they had to take the men, that they had to do with them what they were desiring. They couldn't let go of this. And that is sickly evil. You can see why Abraham considered this place to be pretty lost and gone himself, even though he also even had a little bit of a fondness. We can see by Lot calling them brothers that he had a fondness towards these people. He wanted to try and settle the matter with them. He wanted to say, guys, please just go home, period. But he knew that they were starting to act crazy and they were out of their right frame of mind and they weren't going to settle for nothing. And Lot knew that. And so, even though he, I'm sure, didn't want to, in that culture, like we talked about, the highest honor and respect goes to your guests, and you're supposed to sacrifice the well-being of your family for the sake of those who are guests. If you only had a certain amount of food, you eat a little bit less so that you can give what you have to your guests. And here, Lot, in one sense, has an admirable quality, but at the same time, like, how do you win at all? Of course, he could have 100% stood up and said, no, you guys are going to leave right now. I'm going to protect my family and my guests. That would have been the most honorable thing for Lot to do. But even he had been a little bit corrupted by the city. Like we had talked about in the last episode, we were asking, had he been corrupted? And of course, if he hadn't been at all, I think he would have completely stood the ground. But at the same time, when you have the whole city ready to mob you, he, I guess, kind of like Abraham, he was trying to save his own back. He was trying to save his guests back, and he was just trying to appease them. He said, like, go and do whatever sort of pleasurable things you want to do with them. And man, that also would have been a super disgrace, because then his daughters honestly would have been a disgrace and talk of the town if all the men had basically gotten in one night to do stuff sexually with them. What man would there be left in the city to respect them? And this is a horrible catch-22. Who could he marry his daughter off to? He'd have to find someone from outside of the city. But there's more that happens in the story. You know, these guys become so belligerent. They're so willing to fight for their desires and what they want. They came with expectation to unload their manly desires, and they weren't going to leave until they got it. And so if that meant even doing something to Lot, they probably would have done that. But then it says, you know, that in verse 10, that the men inside, which are the two angels. So now it's calling the angels men. And see, this is where I've been talking about things, you know, the people from the city called them men. And now even the author of the Bible is calling them men. So these angels are definitely humans. And so God sent actual people. And obviously in what sort of form, we can't 100% say. But it says that they reached out and grabbed Lot. So they had to have been physical because they're having this experience. And so they pull Lot in the house and then they shut the door. So right before the guys, then in verse 11, it says, then they struck the men who were at the door of the house, from the youngest to the oldest, with blindness. The men outside wore themselves out trying to find the door. So here we have the two visitors or guests or men who were staying with Lot. They pull him inside, and then it says that they struck all of the men who were gathered out there, from the youngest to the oldest, with blindness. How did they do that? Did they have like pepper gas, and did they just like unload it on the crowd? I don't think they had pepper gas, but who knows? They may have been traveling with stuff. But again, these aren't just ordinary men. These are angels. And so did they spiritually do something? And also, was it a physical blindness or was it spiritual, where basically they were already so blind? These men who came to rape the guests, essentially the angels, they were already so blinded that the angels, from the power of God, struck total blindness on these people to the point where they were going crazy. They were trying to get to the door. They were trying to knock it down, but maybe Lot and the two guests were holding down the fort. Or it's possible that they literally were struck with physical blindness and God did a miracle to save them, because this is the whole city. You'd think they'd find some sort of way in through the doors and the windows, even if they had them. And so this is obviously an extremely terrifying and horrific and traumatic experience. Like, how do you have a whole city of men who are willing to go through the lengths of harming one of their own citizens so that they can gang rape some guests? Man, it's no wonder that God has heard a cry, because it says that they were shouting and crying to him. You know, give us these guys, because we came here so that we could with them. And the fact that they were so belligerent, willing to fight, weren't going to leave, weren't even going to settle for his daughters, that they were only willing to settle for unnatural and perverted sex on top of the act of already pervertedness. The story is almost too much to even take in and even believe. But this is why God was going there, and that's why he sent these two angels, because they were there to determine if the city was evil to the point of saving or not. And since it didn't even say that there were 10 men standing their ground, it seems as if there's only one righteous person standing ground, and that's Lot. And obviously these two men who came to visit, these two angels, aren't from Sodom, so they don't really count. So we're left with maybe just Lot as the only righteous man in the city. And who knows if women showed up too. It says men, so it was probably men, but many times men can refer to anyone. But let's get to verse 12. It says, "Then the two visitors," and it specifically calls them men in Hebrew, the two men, "said to Lot, 'Who else do you have here? Do you have any son-in-laws, sons, daughters, or any other relatives in the city? Get them out of this place, because we're about to destroy it.' The outcry against this place is so great before the Lord that he sent us here to destroy it." So now we find out. So what is another word for angels? As we've been talking about, it's the word messenger. So these two men who were angels came with a message. That's why they went there. They were not only going to find out, but God already knew what was up with the city. And that's why I was saying earlier that, it's probably not a matter of whether or not God knows. It's more so him playing along for our sake. He says he's going to go down there to check and make sure if these cries are really valid. Man, Lot and the angels and his daughters were crying out, "God, save us from these sicko men who came here to do horrors to us." The angels had all the proof, I think, that they needed. The fact that all of the men of the city were corrupt. What other proof do you need at that point? It's proof that the city had become so corrupt, and that the reports were true, that it's not safe to go there as a visitor, that it's not safe to have daughters, it's not safe to even be in your own home. It had become a pretty messed up place, and it's no wonder why God heard that there were cries and what's the word I'm looking for? Protests to what was going on in the city. And it seems as if everyone was on board, but honestly, what if those cries were coming from Lot and his family? If they'd heard that things were bad over there. Usually, righteous people are the ones that cry out against unrighteousness, because the opposite of evil and bad and unrighteousness is goodness and righteousness. And it's very clear that that was lacking. And of course, even in times where, let's say you have someone who's part of a gang, even they're going to cry out to God from time to time, like, man, God, this other gang, they're after us, please help us. God, like the city's so messed up, man. And God, we just need your help. Even someone who is doing evil will cry out to God, because we all know that we need his help. And there's so much stuff that can go on. Someone who is in a gated community, they're like, yeah, I got all the money I need. Yeah, I have a nice community. I built this up for myself and my family, and I'm proud of myself. No one's going to take this away. I'm going to keep myself at safety length. I've got cameras all over my home. I've got highest quality protection systems. I'm all good. I worked all this myself. I didn't need God. But, if you had the whole city breaking in to your home and the city had become so corrupt, or, if you live in a nice place like that, but a high profile gang starts tracking you down, they ain't going to care about your high security camera systems. They're going to try to usurp that, and all the protection that you thought you had isn't going to do any good. Even someone who thought that they were safe with their money and their possessions, even they would have to call out to God in that moment. And none of us can, guarantee that something won't happen to us, but the fact that it's pretty clear that Lot is trying to do the right thing, even though he makes a stupid statement and offers his daughters. He doesn't actually end up giving them to these men. He does try to fight them off, and he does get pulled in the house, and these two angels end up striking blindness to the point where these men basically just give up. And then after that point, the two men are like, hey, do you have any family? Do you have, any son-in-law, sons, daughters, relatives living here? Because the city's about to be destroyed. And it specifically says, get them out of this place because we are about to destroy it. Wait, I thought, wouldn't God destroy it? But remember, these are two angels that just came from being with God. So they are his messengers, so they can deliver it as it's their own message, because they are tag teaming with God. And so are they actually going to be the ones to destroy the city? Are they going to light it on fire and watch the whole thing burn? Well, we can entertain some conversations of what happened, and we will talk about if the city being destroyed is successful or ends up happening at all. And we'll talk more about it in future episodes. But for now, I just wanted to focus on the story of what is happening with the people of this city, and the focus on how it is now confirmed how evil the city is. The fact that everyone, not even 10 righteous people, stood. Essentially just one. Lot stood in their path. And so I wanted to actually bring something else up. There's a part that actually talks about Lot a little bit later on in Scripture. In 2 Peter 2, it talks a little bit about him, and it says about Sodom and Gomorrah. It says, if by turning to the cities of Sodom and Gomorrah to ashes he condemned them to extinction, making them an example of what is going to happen to the ungodly. And if he rescued righteous Lot, greatly distressed by the sensual conduct of the wicked, for as that righteous man lived among them day after day, he was tormented, his righteous soul, over the lawless deeds that he saw and heard. So here we see in 2 Peter 2, 6 through, I read 8, but we'll read 9 in a minute. This is another book later on that was written thousands of years later, reflecting on the story of Lot in Genesis, and it calls him a righteous man. So what exactly did Abraham ask? Like, God, are you going to destroy it if there's 10 righteous people? Well, we know that there is one righteous man, but there were a few others who were saved, even going back to the imagery like I have been talking about with Noah. It said the world was so corrupt at that point that God had to destroy it all. And here, there's one righteous man, so not enough. There's not even 10 of them. But what do we see in verse 12 as we were reading? The men or angels ask Lot if he has any other family or relatives. So it's not just him that the men are trying to save. They didn't come there just to share a message like, hey, we're destroying the city, you're screwed. Just wanted to share that with you. I know you're one of the righteous ones, so we just wanted to let you know so that maybe you have a chance of getting out, but basically just so you could have the extra satisfaction of knowing that you were a good guy, but you're going to be destroyed anyways. So, yeah. Have a nice day. We're going to disappear now. That's not what's happening. He's being warned ahead of time. And what happened with the story of Noah? He was warned ahead of time of the destruction so that he could prepare and get ready and be rescued. And what does it say in 2 Peter 2? Let's read verse 9. It says, then the Lord knows how to rescue the godly from trials and to keep the unrighteous under punishment until the day of judgment. So these unrighteous men, these people who are being the opposite of Lot and being unrighteous, are putting themselves under judgment and punishment. And no, they haven't fully received their judgment yet, but they've basically accused themselves. Everyone is a witness in the town of what just happened. And essentially, there is no turning back for Sodom now. And as it mentions here, not just Sodom, but also, as it mentioned earlier, Sodom and Gomorrah. And Gomorrah was a small distance away from Sodom, but they were pretty close next to each other. So these two cities are pretty sick and evil. Sodom, I think, being the worst. And so that's also where Lot was living, which is why it had to focus in on Sodom specifically, because that's where the pivot of the story takes place. The messengers of God go there, they confirm that this place is sick and like spiritually sick to its bones. And so it's clear at this moment. Then they break the news to Lot. Lot, it's time. The city is going to be destroyed. So do you have any family? Because you're going to need to get out of here. So let's read this last verse before we talk about what happens the next morning early at dawn. So in verse 14 it says, "Then Lot went out and spoke with his sons-in-law who were going to marry his daughters. He said, 'Quick, get out of this place because the Lord's about to destroy the city.' But the sons-in-law thought he was ridiculing them. So, the two daughters that he just offered to all the men of the city, they were actually engaged and betrothed to marry his daughters. There were two guys who were waiting to marry. My question is, were they part of the city? And if they were part of the men of the city asking if they could, have sex, were they like, hey guys, like, we're the ones who are engaged and betrothed to these ladies. Can we get first dibs? It's only fair. And I'm not sure if that would have passed with the men of the city with the state of mind they were in, but also were they, in Lot's home as well and waiting and watching and experiencing all of this? Like either way, it says when Lot brought up that the city was going to be destroyed, they basically thought like, dude, are you mocking us or something? It says that they specifically thought that he was ridiculing them. And when it says ridiculing, it essentially means taunting. And so this is an accusation statement in their eyes, at least. And was it because they were one of the people in the city that wanted to get with his daughters a little extra early? At the same time, like the rest of the men of the city didn't want to seem to have anything to do with that. They just wanted the two men who were visiting. And also, what if the men of Sodom thought they were spies? So like, oh, we're going to show them, we're going to knock them up until they can't even see the light of day anymore and leave them for half dead. That'll show them. Why did they? I have no idea. And what was going on inside of the son-in-law's mind? There were obviously two of them because he offered his two daughters. And so he was probably trying to marry them off at the same time Lot was. And so I'm sure that after Lot's daughters heard the ones that, they're coming to love and they're, ready to marry, to hear them get in a heated argument and to talk back to their dad. I'm sure this is a really sticky moment for the ladies. And, they also were basically just put up for sale by their dad only just a few minutes or hours earlier, when he was going to give them to the people of the city. So this is, messy no matter how you look at it, but Lot is trying to do the right thing. Instead of waiting or laughing at the two men or angels, he listens to them. And what is the most important lesson that I've been telling you guys that is essential, that God is trying to get across through our thick skulls? It's to listen to him when he's speaking to us. Like, man, I know if I would have listened to God all of the times when I had fallen into sexual immorality, if I would have listened to God instead of my own thoughts and feelings and urges, man, I would be living a totally different life for the better. And of course, God's brought me to good places and helped me out of this addiction, but I still have horrible temptations and desires. Like, some of those urges still flare up in me, and I almost feel like I can't resist these, deep urges to do sick stuff. And I think we all have that kind of stuff if we're honest. Someone who's in business and they have a lot of things, going well for them financially, but they just can't help themselves from embezzling just a little more money. As long as I don't get caught and people don't notice. It's the same thing for any kind of lust and addiction. If you're addicted to money, or you're addicted to sex, or you're addicted to gambling, or you're addicted to power, it's always justifying things that are crooked and disgusting and stuff that other people wouldn't approve of. So back when we boil it down, Lot was being faithful and he was doing what was right. What's right is listening to God. And Lot took it seriously, just like Noah took building the ark seriously, because God was going to destroy the world. If he hadn't built it, he would have died with everyone else because he wouldn't have listened to God. Aren't you starting to get it? This is one of the most important teachings in all of Scripture. I feel sometimes we don't talk about it enough. Listening to what God has already said in the Bible helps us know what he's saying even now. Like, if we see something evil, we can hear God saying through this story, like, hey, stand up for what's right. Keep your eyes and ears open for me to help give you instructions of what you should be doing. And so it's both us listening to what he said in the past, but also listening to what he specifically is saying to us in the moment. And so we're going to wrap things up, and we'll pick up next time with what happens that next morning. Hey, I'm so glad you guys could join for today's podcast. I hope things clicked for you and that you're able to better understand God's word. Jesus said, "Whoever has ears to hear, let them hear." So keep on listening to what God has to say, and I'll see you guys next time. God bless.